You've probably heard this advice 1,000 times. You just need to want it badly enough. Financial gurus tell you wealth requires iron discipline. They say you must wake at dawn, resist every temptation, track every penny with military precision. They promise that if you're motivated enough, if you really want financial security, you'll find the willpower to save aggressively, invest consistently, and build the retirement you deserve. Here's the uncomfortable truth. This advice sets most people up for failure. We've spent 15 years researching wealth accumulation patterns among middle-income and affluent households. We've examined financial behaviors across more than 300 case studies. What we discovered contradicts nearly everything the personal finance industry tells you about building wealth after 50. The people who accumulate substantial assets rarely describe themselves as disciplined savers. They don't wake up each morning summoning extraordinary willpower. They don't constantly resist temptation through sheer mental force. Instead, they've made specific behavioral adjustments that require almost no ongoing effort. They've restructured their financial lives so wealth accumulation happens automatically, not through motivation, but through environmental design. Let me explain what behavioral economists have discovered about why motivation fails. Psychologists Roy Baumeister and Kathleen Vohs published groundbreaking research demonstrating that willpower functions like a muscle. It fatigues with use. Their studies showed something remarkable. People who exerted self-control in one domain, resisting dessert for instance, performed worse on completely unrelated tasks requiring discipline. The act of resisting temptation depleted their mental resources. Think about your typical day. You make dozens of financial micro-decisions. Should you buy coffee out or make it home? Should you browse that online sale? Should you eat leftovers or order takeout? Each decision draws from the same limited pool of mental energy. By evening, your willpower reserve runs empty. This explains why you can start Monday morning with perfect intentions about spending, yet find yourself making impulse purchases by Thursday afternoon. You haven't failed morally. Your brain simply ran out of self-control fuel. Here's the problem. The financial industry built an entire advice ecosystem around willpower. They tell you to budget meticulously, resist purchasing temptations, and maintain discipline across thousands of spending decisions annually. This approach ignores how human psychology actually works. Researchers at the Yale School of Management studied retirement savings patterns across workplace 401k plans. They found that participation rates varied wildly, from 26% at some companies to 86% at others. What explained this dramatic difference? Not education levels, not income, not age demographics. The difference came down to one factor. Default settings. Companies with automatic enrollment captured 6 times more participants than those requiring employees to actively sign up. Same people, same income levels, vastly different outcomes. This reveals something profound about building wealth after 50. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in Economics for identifying systematic errors in human judgment. One of the most powerful he documented: anchoring bias. Anchoring occurs when an initial piece of information disproportionately influences subsequent decisions. That first number you encounter sets an unconscious reference point for everything that follows. Retailers exploit this constantly. They display expensive items first, making moderately priced alternatives seem reasonable by comparison. They show inflated original prices next to sale prices, anchoring you to the higher number. But anchoring affects your financial life in subtler, more damaging ways. Consider your housing costs. Most people anchor their acceptable housing expense to their current payment. When income rises, they feel pressure to upgrade proportionally. They unconsciously anchor their appropriate housing cost to a percentage of income rather than to their actual needs. Research published in the Journal of Consumer Research examined how people set spending benchmarks. The researchers found that consumers establish mental spending budgets based on arbitrary reference points, often the first number they encounter when considering a purchase category. Someone shopping for furniture might see a couch priced at $4,000. Suddenly, a $2,000 option seems moderate and restrained. Without that initial anchor, they might have considered $800 expensive. Your peer group creates powerful anchors too. If your friends vacation internationally twice yearly, that becomes your reference point for normal vacation spending. If colleagues drive luxury vehicles, you unconsciously calibrate your acceptable car payment upward. Here's what makes anchoring particularly insidious. You don't notice it happening. You genuinely believe you're making rational decisions based on value and preference. In reality, arbitrary reference points are steering your spending patterns, often toward higher consumption than serves your long-term interests. The good news: you can use anchoring to build wealth instead of undermining it. Thomas Stanley and William Danko conducted extensive research on millionaire households for their landmark study published in the late 1990s. They interviewed hundreds of affluent individuals to understand common wealth-building patterns. They discovered something unexpected. Most millionaires didn't budget in the traditional sense. Instead, they practiced what researchers now call pre-commitment strategies. They made single decisions that eliminated thousands of future temptations automatically. Let's examine how this works with automatic savings. Traditional advice tells you to budget carefully, track spending, and transfer remaining money to savings each month. This requires constant vigilance and repeated willpower expenditure. Wealthy individuals reverse this process. They transfer money to savings automatically before they see it. They anchor their lifestyle to their post-savings income, not their gross income. Behavioral economists call this mental accounting. Once money moves to savings, they psychologically recategorize it as unavailable for consumption. The wealth building happens invisibly, requiring zero ongoing effort. Studies published in Psychological Science examined saving behaviors under different conditions. Researchers found that people who committed to automatic transfers saved 3 to 4 times more than those with identical incomes who intended to save manually. Same income, same stated goals. Vastly different outcomes. The automatic savers experienced no greater discipline or motivation. They simply eliminated the decision point, where willpower could fail. This principle extends far beyond retirement accounts. Consider housing decisions. Someone earning $80,000 annually might qualify for mortgages up to $350,000. Banks anchor them to this maximum affordable amount. Wealth builders anchor differently. They identify housing that meets their actual needs, perhaps a $200,000 property, then lock in that lower payment permanently. They've now automated $2,500 monthly in additional wealth-building capacity. They don't resist upgrading through daily willpower. They made one decision that eliminated the temptation permanently. The same pattern appears in vehicle purchases, insurance coverage, subscription services, and dozens of other financial domains. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky identified another powerful psychological force: loss aversion. Their research demonstrated that people feel losses approximately twice as intensely as equivalent gains. Losing $50 produces roughly twice the emotional impact as gaining $50. This asymmetry profoundly affects financial behavior, especially for people over 50. Loss aversion makes you irrationally avoid investment risk. Even when that caution guarantees wealth erosion through inflation, it makes you hold on to declining assets too long, hoping to avoid locking in paper losses. It makes you obsess over trivial expenses while ignoring large systematic leaks in your financial structure. Researchers at the University of Chicago examined investment patterns among pre-retirees. They found that people in their 50s and 60s often maintain excessively conservative portfolios, holding 60, 70, even 80% in cash or bonds. Why? Loss aversion. After experiencing market volatility earlier in life, they catastrophize potential losses. They focus intensely on downside risk while underweighting the near-certain loss of purchasing power from inflation. Someone holding $200,000 in money market accounts earning 2% might feel safe. But with inflation running 3%, they're guaranteeing a wealth loss of $2,000 annually in real terms. They're so focused on avoiding market losses that they've locked in certain losses instead. Here's the psychological hack that defeats loss aversion: reframe the reference point. Traditional thinking treats your current asset value as the baseline. Any market decline registers as a loss from this reference point. This triggers intense discomfort that motivates defensive behavior, often at exactly the wrong moment. Wealthy individuals reframe differently. They treat their required future spending as the baseline. Their reference point becomes, can I fund my lifestyle 20 years from now? Not, what's my account balance today? This reframing transforms the emotional calculus entirely. Sudden market volatility no longer registers as a loss. It registers as temporary noise around a long-term trajectory. The pain of daily fluctuations diminishes because you've anchored to a different reference point. Research published in Management Science tested this reframing approach. Participants who adopted longer time horizons maintained more aggressive investment positions and experienced less anxiety during market downturns. They didn't develop greater risk tolerance or stronger nerves. They simply changed the lens through which they evaluated their situation. You can operationalize this reframing through simple environmental design. Behavioral economists Shlomo Benartzi and Richard Thaler conducted fascinating research on retirement planning. They found that people chronically underestimate their longevity and dramatically underestimate inflation's impact. Someone planning for retirement might calculate they need $40,000 annually. They feel confident their savings will last 15 years. They've anchored to current dollars and conservative longevity estimates. 20 years later, inflation has eroded their purchasing power by 40%. They're still alive but depleting assets faster than anticipated. The wealth they thought sufficient proves inadequate. The problem isn't stupidity or poor planning, it's that distant future scenarios remain abstract and psychologically unreal. Benartzi and Thaler developed a brilliant solution: age progression software. They showed people digitally aged photos of themselves, images depicting how they'd look at 75 or 80. This simple intervention made future scenarios psychologically concrete. Participants who viewed their aged images allocated 30% more to retirement savings. The future person suddenly felt real, worthy of financial protection. You can apply this principle without specialized software. Calculate your expenses in today's dollars. Now project them forward 20 or 30 years with 3% annual inflation. Write down the specific dollar amounts you'll need. $40,000 today becomes approximately $72,000 in 20 years. That abstraction becomes concrete. The future expense feels real because you've attached a specific number. Now calculate what investment returns you need to generate those future cash flows. Be specific, run the numbers using conservative return assumptions. This exercise transforms vague retirement anxiety into concrete action items. You've made the invisible visible. Researchers at Stanford University studied financial planning interventions. They found that people who calculated specific future expenses in inflated dollars maintained higher savings rates and more aggressive investment allocations. Again, these individuals didn't develop superior discipline, they simply made distant consequences psychologically immediate. Your initial automation percentage might feel modest. That's acceptable. The system's power emerges through incremental increases. Research from the National Bureau of Economic Research examined automatic savings escalation programs. These programs increase contribution rates by 1% annually. The study, conducted by professors Benartzi and Thaler, found that participants who agreed to future increases accumulated nearly 4 times more wealth than those who maintained static contribution rates. Here's how to implement this yourself. Set a calendar reminder for 1 year from today. When it arrives, increase your automatic wealth building transfer by 1 to 2% of your income. If you're currently transferring $500 monthly, increase it to $550 or $600. You won't feel this increase acutely. Why? Because your income likely increased over that year. Cost of living adjustments, performance raises, reduced expenses, as debts pay off, these create space for higher contributions, but even without income growth, people adapt quickly to slightly reduce spending capacity. Behavioral research consistently shows that we adjust to new financial constraints within 2 to 3 months. That initial discomfort fades. The mathematics prove compelling. Someone earning $80,000 annually who starts automated investing at 10% $8,000 yearly and increases by 1% annually will contribute $14,000 yearly by year 5. Over 15 years, that acceleration adds approximately $75,000 to their accumulated wealth compared to maintaining the original rate. The beauty? You never make a conscious sacrifice. Each increase happens automatically. You adapt unconsciously. Economists have long studied what they call commitment devices, mechanisms people use to constrain their future selves. Odysseus ordered his crew to tie him to the mast so he could hear the siren's song without steering toward the rocks. He couldn't trust his future self's judgment, so he eliminated future choice entirely. Modern commitment devices work similarly. Consider health savings accounts. Money flows in pre-tax, grows tax-free, and withdraws tax-free for medical expenses. That's a triple tax advantage unmatched by virtually any other savings vehicle. But here's the commitment mechanism. You can't access funds for non-medical purposes without penalties. You've locked that money away from your spending self. Wealthy individuals maximize these constrained accounts precisely because constraints eliminate temptation automatically. They don't rely on willpower to avoid raiding medical savings. The structure prevents it. Research published in the American Economic Review examined commitment savings products in developing economies. Programs that locked money away until specific dates or goals increased savings by over 80% compared to standard accounts. The magic wasn't better intentions. It was removing the option to fail. You can engineer commitment devices throughout your financial life. Set up automatic mortgage prepayments that withdraw the day after payday. The money disappears before you psychologically categorize it as available. Establish automatic investment purchases that execute monthly regardless of market conditions. You've eliminated the decision point where fear or greed might derail your strategy. Commit to increases in retirement contributions tied to future raises. What Benartzi and Thaler called Save More Tomorrow, you experience no reduction in take-home pay today, yet you've locked in future wealth building. These aren't acts of discipline, they're acts of intelligent system design. Psychologists have extensively documented what they call relative deprivation, the tendency to evaluate well-being by comparison to others rather than absolute standards. Your satisfaction with a $60,000 car depends less on the vehicle's objective qualities than on whether neighbors drive Hondas or BMWs. This comparison orientation devastates wealth accumulation. Research published in Psychological Science found that people consistently overestimate their peers' consumption levels. They believe friends and neighbors spend more than they actually do. This misperception drives unnecessary consumption to keep up with largely imaginary standards. Someone might believe their social circle typically spends $5,000 on vacations. They feel pressure to match this perceived norm. In reality, most peers spend $3,000, but nobody discusses actual numbers, so the inflated perception persists. The researchers called this pluralistic ignorance. Everyone privately doubts whether they should spend so much, but everyone assumes everyone else is comfortable with current norms. Breaking this trap requires making your reference group visible, and accurate studies by economist Robert Frank examined consumption patterns among different income cohorts. He found that people anchor their spending to the top earners they regularly encounter: neighbors, colleagues, extended family. If you're the lowest earner in your social circle, you face constant pressure to overspend relative to your means. You're comparing your income to others' consumption, creating a permanently unwinnable dynamic. The zero-effort solution: curate your comparison environment. This doesn't mean abandoning friends or moving to cheaper neighborhoods. It means deliberately exposing yourself to different reference points. Join communities of wealth builders rather than high consumers. Online forums focused on financial independence, for instance, provide daily exposure to people prioritizing accumulation over display. Read accounts of people successfully building assets on modest incomes. These narratives reset your internal anchors about what's normal or necessary. Follow financial independence authors and researchers who discuss actual wealth-building behaviors rather than consumption-focused lifestyle content. These environmental adjustments require minimal effort but powerfully reshape your psychological landscape. You're not resisting temptation through willpower. You're removing the source of temptation from view. Here's perhaps the most important insight from behavioral finance research. Small structural changes produce disproportionately large behavioral outcomes. Economists call this asymmetric effort. Situations where minimal upfront work generates sustained ongoing benefits. Consider a simple example: switching from individual stock selection to low-cost index funds. This requires perhaps 2 hours of research and implementation. You make the change once, but it eliminates hundreds of hours of future stock analysis, trading decisions, tax loss harvesting complications, and emotional volatility management. Research by Nobel laureate Eugene Fama and economist Kenneth French has consistently demonstrated that most individual stock pickers underperform low-cost market indices. The typical investor would improve returns by doing less, not more. Yet, this knowledge doesn't change behavior for most people. Why? Because traditional financial advice emphasizes active management, sophisticated strategies, and constant optimization. The asymmetric approach flips this entirely. You invest 2 hours to establish automatic index fund purchases. You've now guaranteed market-matching returns for decades with zero ongoing effort. You invest 30 minutes establishing automatic bill payments. You've eliminated late fees, avoided credit score damage, and freed up mental bandwidth. All from a one-time setup. You invest an hour negotiating insurance quotes. You've automated potentially thousands in annual savings for the next several years. Each of these represents massive return on invested effort. Studies published in the Journal of Financial Planning examined advisor recommendations versus actual client outcomes. The research found that clients who implemented simple, automated strategies consistently outperformed those pursuing complex, actively managed approaches. The sophisticated investors spent more time, experienced more stress, and generated worse results. Why? Because complex strategies require sustained willpower to maintain. They create multiple points where behavioral errors can compound. They depend on perfect execution across thousands of micro-decisions. Simple, automated systems eliminate these failure points entirely. Let's synthesize these insights into practical implementation. Your goal isn't developing extraordinary discipline. It's constructing a financial environment where wealth accumulation happens automatically, invisibly, inevitably. Start with automatic savings. Determine a percentage you can sustain indefinitely, perhaps 15 or 20% of gross income. Establish automatic transfers that execute the day after payday. This single decision eliminates thousands of future savings decisions. You've anchored your spending to post-savings income, making that reduced amount feel normal within months. Next, examine fixed expenses with high switching costs. Refinance your mortgage if rates have dropped. The paperwork seems tedious, but 30 minutes of discomfort might automate thousands in annual savings for decades. Negotiate insurance premiums annually. Carriers count on inertia. Most people never shop around. 30 minutes of comparison shopping often yields 20 to 30% reductions. Audit subscription services ruthlessly. Most people unknowingly maintain subscriptions to services they rarely use. A 1-hour audit might reveal $200 monthly in automated charges you've forgotten. These aren't budgeting exercises requiring ongoing willpower. They're one-time optimizations that automatically reduce expenses permanently. For investment decisions, embrace radical simplicity, establish target date funds or balanced index portfolios aligned with your retirement timeline. These automatically rebalance and adjust risk exposure as you age. You've eliminated all ongoing portfolio management decisions. Set up automatic rebalancing if your platform offers it. You've now guaranteed you'll buy low and sell high, mechanically, without requiring any market timing judgment or emotional discipline. Finally, engineer commitment devices for known weaknesses. If you're tempted to withdraw retirement funds early, choose accounts with meaningful penalties. If you struggle with credit card spending, freeze your cards in ice, literally. If you browse online stores when bored, delete shopping apps and payment information. These aren't signs of weakness. They're intelligent structural choices that acknowledge human psychology. Here's what makes this approach so powerful. Small structural improvements compound psychologically just as investment returns compound financially. When you establish automatic savings, you prove to yourself that wealth building doesn't require constant struggle. This success builds confidence. Confidence makes subsequent optimizations feel achievable rather than overwhelming. When you eliminate one category of financial stress, late fees for instance, you free up mental bandwidth for higher value decisions. You create an upward spiral of improving financial choices. Researchers call this cascading implementation intentions. One successful behavioral change creates momentum that facilitates subsequent changes. Studies, published in the European Journal of Social Psychology, found that people who successfully established one automatic savings behavior were 3 times more likely to implement additional wealth-building strategies within 6 months. The initial success didn't increase discipline or motivation. It reduced psychological resistance to future changes by proving that transformation doesn't require superhuman effort. This is why the zero-effort approach ultimately outperforms willpower-intensive strategies. Willpower-based approaches create constant friction. Every day presents new opportunities for failure. Each failure reinforces the belief that wealth building requires extraordinary capabilities. You lack structure-based approaches create the opposite dynamic. Each automated system reinforces that wealth building flows naturally from intelligent design rather than constant struggle. Perhaps you're thinking, this sounds reasonable, but where do I actually start? Start with the highest leverage intervention in your specific situation. If you're not saving anything currently, establish automatic retirement contributions first. Even 5% makes an enormous difference over time. Research by retirement plan provider Vanguard found that increasing savings rates from 0 to 5% produced larger wealth impacts than investment selection, market timing, or any other decision. If you're already saving but maintaining expensive housing or vehicles, run the numbers on downsizing. One decision might automate thousands monthly in additional wealth-building capacity. If you're saving adequately but investing too conservatively, adjust your asset allocation. 30 minutes of portfolio restructuring might generate tens of thousands in additional returns over the next decade. If you're doing well financially but surrounded by high-consuming peers, deliberately expose yourself to different reference groups. This psychological adjustment costs nothing but powerfully reshapes spending impulses. The specific starting point matters less than the principle. Make one structural change that reduces future willpower requirements, then let that change settle in. Allow it to become normal, automatic, invisible. After 3 to 6 months, implement another optimization. Then another. Within 18 months, you'll have constructed a financial system that builds wealth automatically while requiring minimal ongoing attention or discipline. You won't have developed extraordinary willpower, you'll have become the person who doesn't need it. The motivation myth tells you wealth requires constant discipline, unwavering focus, and superhuman self-control. This advice serves the financial industry's interests. It keeps you engaged with products, seeking the next motivational push, believing you need professional management to overcome your own weakness. The evidence tells a different story. Wealth accumulation after 50 rarely results from extraordinary discipline. It results from intelligent system design that aligns your environment with your goals. You don't need more motivation. You need better structure. You don't need stronger willpower. You need fewer decisions where willpower matters. You don't need complex strategies. You need simple systems that work automatically. The people who build substantial wealth make this mindset shift early. They stop trying to win through effort and start designing environments where winning becomes inevitable. That's the zero-effort wealth hack. Not zero work, but zero ongoing struggle. One decision eliminates 1,000 temptations. One structural change automates years of compounding returns. One environmental adjustment removes the constant friction that derails most people's financial progress. You're over 50. You don't have time to waste on approaches that sound virtuous but fail in practice. You need strategies that actually work with human psychology rather than against it. Start today, pick one structural optimization, implement it, let it work, then move to the next one. 12 months from now, you'll have built a wealth system that requires almost no ongoing effort, yet generates results that would seem impossible through willpower alone. That's not motivational fantasy, that's behavioral science in action.